This is day 6 of the December 88 7-day retreat in Springwater. There's so many questions left, it's hard to know with which to start. But maybe it doesn't matter. This is what I wrote down. I don't remember at all verbatim what was said, but this is what I wrote down later to capture the question somehow. I'm observing that all the pleasures and pains brought about through the me complex, the me structure, me thoughts, have been highly addictive. And the body and mind constantly crave these pleasures and pains. As something familiar. Therefore, they are endlessly repeating themselves. This being so, how can this circle, cycle, or continuum ever be broken? The addiction to the pleasures, coupled with the pains of thinking and acting out of the me complex, thinking about oneself, acting out of the thought for oneself, the needs of the self, cravings, fears, desires, drives to be somebody, to possess in imagination or actually possess somebody or things. The whole acquisitiveness of the me. We talked a lot about the identifications and the pleasures and feelings of familiarity and security that identification brings with someone or something. The competitiveness. Somebody said, why you talk so little about competitiveness, rivalry which is going on all over, smallest circles and globally. And there's pleasure in competitiveness, particularly if one is getting ahead of the other, becoming somebody in the process, getting respect in family or society as one advances competitively. Or if one isn't competitive, oneself being very attached to watching competitive games. The addiction to that, the pleasures of it. The person recited an experiment which we have often mentioned here in talks, where a rat was given 2 levers to press in a cage, one lever dispensing food and the other lever dispensing a stimulation of what the researcher called a pleasure center in the brain of the rat. There was an electrode mounted to this rat's brain, and the rat kept pushing the lever to stimulate the pleasure center. Practically starved itself to death. Of course, having worked with rats once, these little green pellets that rats get day in and day out for breakfast, lunch, and supper aren't the most exciting things in the world. Has to be careful with these experiments. Also, imagine being in a cage with an electrode mounted into the head. Maybe that thing demands some distraction from it or tranquilization from it. Makes it more bearable to be in this actually intolerable situation. Away from the other rats. Rats are very gregarious animals. And yet even if we leave that experiment out, one can look for oneself, the constant pursuit of something pleasurable. Mostly in fantasy and image, particularly if one sits here in a retreat. One person said, I really indulged in this today, just making little fantasy constructs and just watching them float down the river of consciousness. It was very pleasurable. There's nothing that felt like interrupting that process. Awareness, the person said, seems so abrasive, so stark, and seems to take so much energy and effort to break into this pursuit and enjoyment of pleasure with its pain. Because we also are addicted to our pains and sufferings. Because we become somebody through these pains and sufferings. We become a sufferer, a victim. And if there's nothing else to enjoy, we enjoy being that, a patient. And asking, well, one can ask, well, who is addicted? What's this addiction? It's the body and mind craving the stimulation, which it is used to, familiar with. In Germany, I read in a newspaper, a small item in the scientific section, that in a thousandth of a second, 30 billion chemical processes take place in the human body. I committed that to memory because it was so staggering. Of course, maybe the article was wrong, or maybe I didn't remember it right, but a lot of chemical processes in a fraction of a second taking place in this organism. And then the question, can that cycle or that continuum ever be broken. One can't answer that theoretically or speculatively, can one? Even though that's what the mind is conditioned to do, to say yes or no, or try to find someone who promises to break it for one, or who will suggest ways and means to do it. But if is this question a real one for oneself? A real, serious, driving question. One isn't asking it to throw out a question, but one is wondering about this thing, because one is observing what is going on. And one is observing not only the addiction to pleasure and familiarity and security, but also the problem that creates in our interrelationship with each other. Because as long as the movement of me first, me and mine first, no matter if it's little me or the larger me, as long as that movement is active, we cannot live in peace with each other, in peace and love and intelligence. We are on a constant collision course with each other. And with ourselves too, because there are many conflicting pleasures and pursuits within ourselves. Pursuing one causing guilt because one is not pursuing another. Guilt or discontent. So the first step is to put that question to oneself in all seriousness. Not for anyone else to answer. One can explore it together. We've often talked about this, the intensity of that and the energy and beauty of exploring something together, the same thing. Not with opinions or knowledge brought to bear on the exploration, but starting from not knowing and looking from the surface to the depth of it, alone or together. And as one lives from moment to moment, not just during a few rounds in a retreat once or twice a year, or a few days, but that one realizes the utter significance of watching, of observing. One's moment-to-moment thoughts and addictions, and maybe the feelings of withdrawal if one doesn't give in, if one forcefully renounces something, goes on a diet, so to speak, through willpower and resolve. And then with all diets, come the day that the diet ends, the indulgence again. Maybe going overboard now. To observe all of that, so that one learns as one goes about the mind and body and the interrelationship among each other. A question that is coming up right now is it possible in this moment-to-moment observation or listening inwardly and outwardly, is it possible to perceive one thing going on within oneself or outside of oneself? Observe one thing without making anything of it. Which, of course, means to observe all the things that we're making of things that are being observed. And as one notices these mechanisms of labeling, of knowing, of comparing, of reacting, judging, can they, as they are seen, drop away in the seeing so that there is only bare fact? A feeling has arisen and that's that. A thought has arisen and that's that. To see it and not comment on it, not make statements about it to oneself, about oneself, which is maybe an inbuilt mechanism of the brain to constantly sort of replay, instant replay and comment, interpretation, evaluation, how am I doing? And in that process, constantly strengthening the sense of me. One feels differently every moment. There are different sensations, emotions. One makes so much out of it. And that blurs and fogs the clear perception of it. And makes it almost impossible to instantly let go of it. So in looking at oneself or talking with friends about oneself or each other, going to a therapy or group therapy or writing journals about oneself, is it a revelation, a clear and simple revelation of what is going on? Or in the process is one becoming somebody interesting or important? This strengthening of the sense of self rather than a dismantling of it by seeing and letting go of it. Not seeing and becoming that, adding it to one's treasures about oneself. And one may find that adding to the treasures about oneself, knowledge about oneself, is also an addictive process. One craves that interest in oneself and carrying more and more knowledge about oneself around with oneself. Not at all putting down the importance, how could I, of finding out about oneself. But let us leave that question sit there. Is this adding and strengthening the sense of self, of me, or does it dissipate it? Begin to dismantle it in dying to the addiction of thinking about oneself all the time, by seeing it and being done with it. A thought, an image, a drive, a move, an urge, a fear, a motive, a goal. Seeing it, and in the seeing, dying to it. Dying meaning not making a thing out of it, then it's already dead. Not that this organism is dying in the process. One may find it when there is an increasing vitality and aliveness, because then there can be a free awareness for the next moment, or for this moment, not carrying around what I found out last moment. This brings in a question that was asked by someone. I hope I'm not going too fast. Maybe that would be good if people were able to say, wait a minute, could you say that once more, or could you go a little slower? But then we do have meetings, even though they're sort of coming to an end. The retreat is coming to an end. We'll think about that, talk about it in the discussion. The question that someone brought up was, you talk about this universal fear of dying, which we all share. What about people who commit suicide? They don't seem to be afraid of dying at all. They seem to be afraid of living. We didn't talk much about the fear of dying yesterday. Mention it very briefly. Maybe we can look at it in connection with what was just said about seeing something, a thought, a drive, an urge, and in the seeing, the dying, the not making something out of it, not elaborating it, reacting to it, storing it as more knowledge about me. But the seeing being the letting go of it. Why are we afraid to die? What is our fear of death? As we kind of think about it right now, together at this moment, our fear of dying, fear of death, what is that? One may be afraid of dying a slow, painful death, having known about other people and heard about other people dying slow, painful deaths, and imagining how it must be and not wanting to go through what one imagines to be unbearable. That is one of our fears of dying, because many people say, I wouldn't mind just dropping dead instantly, not waking up in the morning, dying in bed, heart attack or so, gone. Everybody says it, and I don't know what is so special about this. It's always said sort of with as though it was something especially courageous or so. Of course, it's nice to go quickly. Not know about it, not be aware of it, of anything, just gone. Some people die that way. I don't know whether most people do, or most people have a slower death, a slower dying process. But how does one know how one will be at that moment, from moment to moment? We speculate so much and scare ourselves through our speculations. And in speculating about how it will be to die, at that moment again being absorbed in addictive fantasy and not with the bare moment. By bare, I don't mean lifeless, but not anything made out of it. Maybe if there's the certainty of death, which is there all the time, not just at a certain point when one is ill, so we all certainly will die. But if the certainty is there in consciousness, maybe it is much easier to relinquish the baggage we carry around. To be free of it. And when there's no baggage carried around about me and my fear of not continuing as me, as this story of my life, when that fear isn't there, then there's no sense of time. No sense of fear. So how does one know one will be at the moment of dying? I think it's much more important to see how we are now. Not speculating about another time later in the future, but looking now at our clutching and holding on to this story book of me, story picture book of me, which we would like to be an unending series of more editions. That too is an addiction, isn't it? The thought of continuing forever. If not in this life, then in what myth provides, paradise or happy hunting grounds. There was a German myth for the warrior to be able to worry forever after dying. Forever warring, and then as one died, a beautiful maiden, quite hefty, Valkyrie, picking one up on her horse, I don't remember the whole myth, and reviving one with red wine or some such thing. So one can relax for a while and then go back to war. To each his own. Because within the last 100 years or so, I don't know how long exactly, not sure, the Eastern belief in reincarnation, rebirth has captivated has captivated the Western mind. Now one doesn't have to worry so much about ending in this lifetime, because there are endless lifetimes to be lived. And there may be great comfort in that thought, in that idea. Comfort from having to face the anxiety of ending. One doesn't need to think about ending, one can think about continuing. And usually, in a better life, I don't think one ever looks forward to continuing in a worse life. But again, these speculations and beliefs and fantasies are what one thinks are true stories, one believes in that to be true. Don't they all take away from paying attention now? Why are we afraid now to look at our fears of ending, of not being somebody? And as long as we cling to being somebody, there is a barrier, there is an enclosure, living in a little space-time capsule. We're right now exploring space in space-time capsules, but who in that capsule, with all the gear that one is wearing as an astronaut, who is in touch with space? I think we're more in touch with space in Springwater, looking at the stars on a clear evening, than when one's traveling in this capsule in all this gear. That's my imagination. It can't be very much in touchness there. I don't think you have picture windows either in those capsules. But you have a tremendous amount of data, computerized, or I don't understand all of that. Of course, the idea of swinging around there may be very stimulating and you can think you're in space, and maybe you can look down on this earth. That must be amazing. Through whatever window is given. Remember the first astronauts, one of them became quite poetical in disembarking and saying how moved he was at seeing this earth as one. As one beautiful globe, beautiful to behold. No divisions visible from that distance. And yet we planted an American flag up there. On the moon. So it's with us, isn't it? Even though for a moment we may be overwhelmed by poetry, beauty, oneness of what is seen. And then comes the patriotism again. We have to keep up with the Russians, or they are ahead of us now, and so forth. Coming back to the question, is the person who is committing suicide afraid of death or afraid of life? If one hasn't considered suicide, it becomes speculative again, or if one hasn't talked with people who have committed suicide, it remains a speculation. But I think whoever is afraid of dying is afraid of living without this capsule, the security capsule. In which belong all the things we've talked about. Me and my possessions, my identity, my importance, or my unimportance. My capacities and whatever. And please, it's going to be misunderstood, maybe already has been misunderstood. We're not talking about renunciating pleasures or job or home or wife and children. All we're asking is, can there be a growing and deepening awareness of what goes on in this body-mind from moment to moment? When we're alone and when we're in relationship with each other and with our job and with nature. The earth and the sky, the water, the trees, the animals. A single flower. The other day, there was a dandelion. It was flush with the ground. There it was, all open. Every little petal and the shadows between the petal, right there. Can one see it without the mind becoming philosophical, poetical? Just see it without me, just seeing it. The snow covering the brown, crunchy leaves and the soft moss, and not make a thing out of it. One doesn't have to make a thing out of anything. It's a marvelous realization. Things can be seen for what they are at that instant, and it's really not a thing, nothing. When the mind isn't busy to grab, clutch, accumulate, or get rid of. One question that has come up cropped up since the first meeting here and there with people, is, how am I to help others? One person said, I've taken that bodhisattvic vow to save all sentient beings. I'm taking that seriously. How can I help others? One person said, you talk so much about understanding oneself, finding out about oneself and looking into oneself. You say so little about helping others. Who are the others? Do we understand the others? Or can we understand the others? I'll put it into quotation marks the others, because I have some trouble with that, even though it's a legitimate word and we are communicating something when we use it. But it so quickly becomes those poor others who need help from me. Can one understand others if one doesn't understand the me? Not understand it once and for all, but from moment to moment, with increasing depth. Maybe in this looking that takes place in a retreat, one may come upon feelings of guilt about not helping others, about living well oneself, maybe well situated economically, and a deep sense of guilt vis-à-vis people who are not well situated economically. Or one may be of good health and a certain feeling of guilt about being well when other people are ill, or poor, or hungry. Oneself has all the food that one needs, and then some more. So is the urge to help others, does that come out of a feeling of guilt? One has to examine this. If one doesn't, one carries confusion right into this work of helping. And what help can there be out of confusion? Does one really understand misery, suffering in oneself? Is one trying to help the suffering because one is suffering oneself? Then can one find out what suffering is? The way the word is used right now, it implies a sufferer, someone who suffers, a division, a feeling of separation in this identity of being a sufferer and seeing other people as that. What does help? Is such a tremendous question to ask. What constitutes help? What is helping someone? And here we don't mean giving food to someone who starves. That is the most natural thing to do. And we don't even bring that off very well in our own country, let alone in other countries, because we can't get together on how to do it. And there's political implications and all these divisive forces preventing taking care of poverty and hunger intelligently as really a communal work. But we are not communal, we are nationalistic, political minded. And do we understand those problems deeply? By watching internal politics, internal power politics, or the politics of revenge, retaliation in oneself on a small level. It's the same thing as what happens globally. Who is one to help, I wonder? What helps? Comforting someone? giving someone support in their feelings of misery or grief. That's what we feel is our natural urge. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with putting one's arm around one who's in grief or misery. Not have any ideas of what one should or should do, but do what one feels like doing at this moment. But at the same time, one can question whether that's enough, and whether one understands misery and grief in oneself, or just says this is a natural and beautiful human expression. Not make something out of something, but probe it, lay it bare, expose it. So, can we understand ourselves and learn about ourselves from moment to moment and share that with whoever wishes to share it? Be open and listen to each other. Not in order to produce an effect, to help others. We don't know what helps. We don't know what help is. Or do we? Somebody told me yesterday it was help when I was not comforted, when I was in misery, when I was not encouraged, not supported. Because we can find out for ourselves. And in this direct discovery of what suffering is, there can be the end of that. And the joy of discovery and the ending of suffering. Which is the ending of the division between me as the sufferer and what I suffer. The ending of making something out of something. And just there being what is. Meeting it completely, without any division or escape. Or wanting it to be otherwise, or trying to get rid of it. Somebody asked me, you mentioned freedom the other day, the freedom and insight. I think that is what freedom is, to be with anything at any time, without escape, without separation. And the joy or energy or love that comes out of, that comes into being in this state of no separation, that has its own action. One doesn't know much about it. Maybe one knows nothing about it. We will end here for today.